So, I've been following Helluva Boss and Has Been Hotel since about the beginning. I didn't know a whole lot about the creator or anyone even tangentially related to it, but I initially just saw the opening pilots and they seemed interesting enough. And as a fan of animation in general, I decided that I'd give it a look. And I didn't see anything too objectionable. The premises were a little different than what most would expect, but there wasn't anything that really stood out to me as an example of quality long-term wise. And for a while, I just followed along, watched them whenever they came out. Luckily, Helluva Boss itself, well, initially seeming like the secondary project, turned out to be the primary way that the show and its sister show, Has Been Hotel, would get marketed to most of the people, especially on the internet. And as of time of recording, the most recent episode has been the finale for Season 2, which brings the total episodes, not counting shorts, to, I believe, 21 if you count the pilot. I followed it through the entire time, but honestly, I can't think of any other show that I've ever followed this closely that has ever been this generally disappointing or just so here and there when it comes to the general quality of the show. And frankly, in the most recent season, it's gotten significantly worse. Well, the show has never been perfect or like a model of, say, what a show should aspire to be. To say that it didn't have at least some good parts in it would just be untruthful. So I decided that maybe it's better than I remember. Maybe I just wasn't thinking as much, or I was just misremembering issues with it, and I decided to rewatch the entire thing again. And no, I was right the first time. It's just a general mess, and it seems like it can't figure out what it wants to do. It doesn't have a consistent tone. There's quite a few bits that either don't line up with what they say in the show, or inconsistencies in the writing, the world building. Characters tend to be lacking in most areas unless they're the essential point of focus for the individual episode or the show as a whole, like Blitz and Stolas. Now, starting off with the pilot itself is generally unobjectionable. The most likely problem people are to have with it is just not finding it funny or just not being engrossed with the premise of the story. And, that's fine. That's kind of what pilot is supposed to be. You can't really establish anything other than the main cast and what kind of show you want it to be. But the problem is that this show doesn't seem to know what it wants to be, and that ends up showing up quite often as a recurring issue. Episode 1 is where we see the most episodic aspects of it, where it's just something that they're doing that happens as part of their daily routine and at their job. The most objectionable bits, I would say, were the parts when they're constantly saying hero as part of the backstory for why the person contacted them wants them to kill someone on the surface, and it just doesn't add anything to the story, and it just becomes repetitive and annoying. Most of the episode is generally lacking in the whole plot development, but it is where we see the first example of a problem with a general character as a whole, and that's Moxie. Moxie is nothing short of a coward and a loser throughout the entirety of this show, and every single episode that is primarily focused around him and his struggle is always the exact same. It's just him nutting up for the first time and not just being a sniveling and a whiny coward the entire show. And it starts with Moxie, who in the show is a hitman for hire. That is his job. His job is to kill people and have no reservations about it or anything like that. And because of his cowardice and weird contradictory points of view when it comes to himself as a hitman and doing his actual job as a hitman, it just ends up getting everyone else into danger, and it's how the entire episode ends up unfolding.
Oh, who the fuck is innocent, Moxie? From the moment of birth, you're already a parasite leeching off your mama's kids.
Wait, the gay character has mommy issues?
Oh no! Anyway,
and at the end of it all the people he didn't want to kill die anyways, which honestly it was kind of funny the first time. There is one aspect of this episode that I really do like, and sometimes you could find this in other episodes, but you kind of have to look for it. If you look in the background of the shot, where clearly the focus isn't on the characters, at the corners of the screen and whatnot, you could see a little bit of visual storytelling, which is nice because the big plot twist is the people they're going to kill are a bunch of cannibals, and Moxie, being a coward and not being willing to go through with it, ends up exposing this secret to the cast. But if you notice, a lot of the furniture is made of human body parts and whatnot. It's a nice detail, and I don't see it in a whole lot of other things. But other than that, the episode really doesn't have a whole lot of purpose, other than being basically just the first run of the show proper. Now, the second episode is pretty simple. It's just an episode focusing on Stolas, his life, and him as a character and where he sits in regards to the story. We're introduced to a point where Stolas is very deeply concerned about caring for his daughter Octavia, and she's the most important thing to him because he's depressed, because he's in a loveless marriage, and he's got nothing going on for him. And this episode takes place directly after the events established in the pilot, which is weird because, according to the wiki, the pod is also non-canon, but a lot of its events get referenced and brought up in other episodes. It's weird continuity, but the basic events that led to it are about the same in the actual proper show. Octavia ends up waking up to her parents yelling and fighting, and she's clearly accustomed to it, knowing full well that they're constantly at odds, and she brings this up quite often in the show whenever she does appear in an episode, so keep that in mind for later. But at the same time, Stolas, while obviously trying to be well-meaning, doesn't really pay attention to what she says or the most obvious signs that his daughter is unhappy. He ends up just taking her to a theme park that he believes she enjoys while actively ignoring her when she expresses how she doesn't want to go and doesn't like being in Lululand. And Stolas really only takes the scene seriously when she literally runs off just to get away from him. Because the entire episode, he just ends up either enjoying himself or flirting with Blitz and ignoring his daughter. And Stolas as a character and how he's used in the show itself is, frankly, it's quite irritating because the big conflict between him and his daughter near the end of the second season isn't necessarily all Octavia's fault for being stupid, which we will get to later. Quite a lot of it is because she's stupid and doesn't pay attention to the most blatant, obvious, in-your-face aspects of her life. But at the same time, her being upset or just mad at her dad isn't completely unfounded when he does take her out on a special day, just to spend the vast majority of it flirting with Blitz and completely ignoring anything and everything to do with her until she runs off. Now, this is a problem, or this episode has a problem that is also present in Has Been Hotel, and it happens quite often in this show. There will be this sudden tone change where there's this big emotional or just impactful scene that's supposed to be the crescendo of the episode, normally near the end. It ends up being kind of jarring because the episodes seem to struggle with actually naturally leading the characters into it. It's just something that kind of happens and everyone just decides to go along with it. And it's not always terrible. This one is slightly better, but the fact that it happens because Stolas is actively ignoring Octavia until she makes a scene, and then he has to go talk to her, and she basically just reaffirms everything she's been saying the entire episode. It's not the greatest storytelling or narrative structure. It's not completely terrible to say that it is somewhat natural, at least. Now, during the emotional scene, it's established that, once again, that Stolas and Stella don't like each other. They've been fighting constantly because Octavia is so used to it that she says that home doesn't even feel like home because her parents hate each other. And it's established that Octavia is 17 and Stella, her mother, is generally shown to be despondent, selfish, or just generally bitchy, even in the little bit of flashback scenes that we get. Because Octavia doesn't ever seem to have any good memories of her mother. She kind of just ignores the fact that her mother exists when her mother is either bragging about not letting Stolas see or talk to Octavia, or when she's actively causing more problems for Stolas himself. And it just feels odd that Octavia acts as if she doesn't know why her parents hate each other, and seems to put all of the blame exclusively on her dad. Like, there's not a single time in the entire show so far where she has ever said anything remotely negative about her mother. And if she's lived with Stella and Stolas her entire life, and, you know, seen them interacting and being parents to whatever extent that might be, you'd think that she would know by now who's the problem and who's actually trying to be a good parent, but she doesn't ever seem to acknowledge any of that. Even like the pictures of them as a family, it's always exclusively Stolas and Octavia together in the paintings, where they seem to be even remotely happy. Frankly, Octavia's just dumb, and she acts as if them being upset with each other and at each other's throats is abnormal or some big change. It obviously isn't, because we even established in the early episodes of the previous or the next season there, when the arranged marriage with Stella was set up, Stolas didn't even like her then. So it's not as if there's been some big division because of the impending divorce. Episode 3 of Season 1 is very inconsequential. It's just another episodic collection of actions and scenes to put together. But there is some strange bits of writing / dialogue. For example, Moxie doesn't seem to understand the plan of them going to the surface. He says they aren't going up just to massacre, which is exclusively what Blitz explained that they were going to do. Like, he literally lines out a plan about how they're going to go up to the surface, kill as many people as possible to win the bet between IMP and Ferocica. And throughout this entire time, and every time they go to the surface using Stolas' grimoire to access the human world, it's framed as illegal because since they're imps and they don't have actual authority to go to the surface world, that becomes the big problem for them later in the show in the second season. But it takes only up till the second season for it to be paid off. But they never really explain why it is that it's illegal to go to the human world, because it's not illegal on Halloween to go up there. It's not illegal to go up there if you're a lust demon. It's just illegal to do it any other time, but they don't explain why. They don't say it'll draw heaven's attention or literally any other thing. It's just not allowed by demon law, which is weird because it's hell. Why do you guys have laws at all? Hell is being ruled by Satan, who's just the biggest, strongest dude in hell because, you know, he's the sin of wrath. I mean, the whole might is right thing would make sense here, but Satan himself is a whole problem we'll get to later when we get to the actual episode he shows up in. By the end of the episode, really the only thing that has happened is Luna yells at Blitz, and we establish that she's kind of awkward and doesn't have a whole lot of friends. And that's about everything we get for Luna. Luna doesn't really have a character arc or anything. She's very much a background / auxiliary character. Even in the episodes that focus on her, nothing really happens of consequence. But she does get a follow-up episode at the very end of this season. For episode 4, you can just skip it. Anything that really happens in episode 4 is fairly inconsequential because even when a follow-up to this specific episode happens in season 2, it's very much not actually important to the overall story. It's just something that they use to pad the time as the background story until they get to the actual important bit right at the end. And unfortunately, there are quite a few episodes like this where it's just an episode to be an episode. I think personally that this was just a little stopgap to pump out some content, to have some attached merch, to keep the funding up for it when they were working on the first season. Which, you know, it's an independent project. As far as I know, at the time, it was just being funded only by the merch sales, which, I mean, sure, that's fine. That's understandable. Honestly, you could just skip episode 4 of the first season. Episode 5 of the first season has some actual overarching plot that ends up being important later on. But the weirdest bit is right at the beginning, Blitz is trying to decide if he cares about his clients because he doesn't actually like going to have sex with Stolas, despite that being like the entire reason that he's allowed to have the book. That leads into a bigger problem we will get to much later when the two of these characters are basically being forced to work together as part of their own stories. Right at the beginning, he says, or he shows that he's a bit upset that he has to give back the book because he's got a bunch of new clients and he wants to get it all done and ready to go. But then Stola says, oh, well, no, I have to do it for my job. And if I don't do it, we can get in trouble. Oh, I'm sorry, you clients will have to wait. And then Blitz just says, oh, fuck my clients. It's like, why'd you bring it up then? If you didn't care about them, why are you talking about it? You're acting as if it's some big inconvenience, but you don't care enough about it to actually do anything. Then as the episode goes on, we're introduced to Millie's family and the antagonist of the episode, Stryker. And they end up invited to the local pain games, but they add in this strange little detail that says Millie isn't allowed to participate in the pain games because she supposedly killed too many people, which it doesn't make sense because, one, they're in the Ring of Wrath, and just before they talk about how she's not allowed to compete, they expect that the competition is literally to be the roughest and toughest in all of Wrath, but only if you don't kill, apparently, which is weird because you're in Wrath, seeing as how murder is kind of commonplace in Hell. It's a weird detail that doesn't really go anywhere, and nothing really happens with it. It's just something they say. The entire world building they end up doing for Hell is objectionable to say the least, or downright dumb at worst. After the whole pain game sequence happens, and Moxie being a whiny little bitch boy because he can't do shit, it ends up to the point where Stryker gets caught attempting to assassinate Stolas, who's at the festival as well. And when he gets caught, he just starts monologuing to Blitz after Blitz comes in to check on what's happening. And the entire scene It's really dumb, and its only existence is to justify the conflict between Blitz and Stolas for later in the series. And even then, it's kind of half-assed because Blitz clearly doesn't care about what Stryker thinks in multiple scenes, but ends up still humoring him and showing like Blitz is conflicted because he believes some of the things that Stryker is saying and just can't do anything about it. And he's like, oh, he's getting to him. Oh, what if he's right? Oh, it's so much emotional turmoil. And during this time, Blitz just lets Stryker walk up to him and talk about how bad Blitz has it because his business is rigged against him, supposedly, which doesn't make sense because part of the reason Blitz's business works at all is the fact that he has access to the human world, which he openly advertises with the existence of his business, but for some reason that doesn't get them in trouble because that's one of the main selling points for Blitz's business is the fact that he ends up having the access to the moral world, which not many other people do, and it's so that he can get revenge killing for whoever is in hell. But at the same time, nobody ever gets in trouble for advertising that. They only get in trouble after Stella and her brother rat them out to whoever it is they tell when they get in trouble later in the second season. So how it's supposedly rigged against Blitz is unclear when, so far as I can tell, Blitz has cornered the market on the whole getting revenge killings on people who are still alive for people who are in hell. After Blitz pretends to go along with it and they try to pull a surprise on a Stryker, he acts real confident. It's like, ha, you're just seeing your dipshit face. Blitz, we just saw you, like, totally falling for this. That's why they illustrated your inner turmoil. Here's the weird part. Blitz has a gun pointed at Stryker. He is within short range, and he's trying to stop Stryker, supposedly, but he just lets Stryker walk up to him and push the gun out of his way. It would have made a lot more sense for Blitz as a character to have just shot at Stryker the second he started moving or yapping, because he's trying to protect Stolas, because if Stolas dies, there is a good chance that he'll be found out for having his grimoire, and that could throw his whole business into turmoil and get him sentenced to whatever he might get sentenced to in the process of being found out. And then when Moxie reappears in the scene and starts doing something, he points a gun at Stryker as well, and it's supposed to be like this big reveal. It's like, Blitz, you already had a gun pointed at him. You haven't shot him yet. This isn't some enormous turnaround or anything. This is just a reaffirmation of the stakes of the scene. A Stryker is trying to get away with assassinating people. You guys have guns pointed at him, and you're too chicken shit to fucking use them. And then when they fight and Stryker starts yapping again, because for some reason, everyone just keeps letting Stryker talk. Stryker doesn't have, like, the upper hand or anything. He's constantly at their mercy, but they just keep fucking letting him yap. But Moxie nuts up for half a second and fires the gun. He purposely misses Stryker because he's a cuck, and Stryker ends up getting away because neither one of these characters could do their fucking job right when it actually mattered. This was the most obvious example of them forcing something to happen in the story because they just needed to for future episodes, and it's so fucking transparent. Once Stryker gets away and all the problems are resolved, Millie's getting chewed out by her parents, failing to stop Stryker and getting injured. And then Moxie just starts to admit openly to his in-laws that he can't protect his wife because he's weak, and blaming them for his inability to defend Millie, and that somehow earns his father-in-law's respect. What the fuck kind of cuck logic is this? I'm too much of a weak little pussy boy to do anything, but it's your fault for noticing. I need my wife to do everything for me. Hey, so you should respect me for that. What the fuck? How do you even justify that to your fucking self? It's just weird. No, it's not weird. It's just retarded little bits like this of the writing where they can't seem to figure out a logical conclusion. They just want something to happen, and they don't care about the logic that goes into it. And I wish it was few and far between. It's not. It's all over this show. The show just lets things happen because they want it to happen, but they couldn't figure out a way for it to happen within the actual framework of the show and the events that happen in it. So it just decides, no, actually, these guys agree with him, and everything's all good. And it's fucking retarded. Episode 6 is pretty similar to episode 4. It's generally inconsequential, and even when something does come from it being recalled for a future episode, it doesn't really matter. It's literally in the same episode that is a callback to episode 4. Nothing happens, and it's a dumb episode in general. Apparently, when they've been going to the human world to do their work, IMP has only targeted people in America to the point where they are constantly being caught on camera and recorded. That seems a very narrow scale. It's just a little odd overall. When they get caught by the guys, they close the portal, and Millie is just crying and pounding on the wall before literally anything has happened. It's within seconds of them closing the portal. They don't know that they're hurt. They don't know that they're dead. They don't have any reason to believe that anything has happened to them other than the fact that they're being cornered. And she's just like getting mad at it and crying for whatever reason. Once Moxie and Blitz get captured, Moxie makes the assertion that they've never dealt with the human government before, but then later we hear these guys talk about being taken seriously by corporate, so they're either a government agency or a private enterprise, but they can't seem to decide which. It's just a weird inconsistency, and it seems just like an oversight that they didn't notice at the time. And when they're in the interrogation room talking to each other, Moxie seems to think Millie is in some sort of danger, but as far as he knows, she is still in hell. Like, he's so worried about her all the time, and Blitz makes a fantastic fucking point when they start, like, yelling at each other. Moxie can't talk or do anything without Millie, and she's always 5 fucking feet away from him, and it's just annoying to listen to him constantly whining and bloviate about her. It's just like, dude, grow a fucking personality. And as they're exposed to this cloud of truth serum, which works on demons for some reason, I don't know, feels like that's a little bit of a stretch, they end up just having this really heavy-handed exposition dump about each other. And the people who have captured them treat this as if it's some form of benefit to them. The entire sequence is just a way to cut to a scene where they can talk about how tragic Blitz is, even the part that was supposed to be for Moxie. It was just explaining Blitz's personality and what he's like to be around from Moxie's point of view. And what's worse is, it talks about his fears of intimacy, but it clearly shows every person in Blitz's life during his own little tripping scene that he's had some relationship with, either being as a sexual partner or someone who is just around him enough to understand the most surface level aspects of himself as a person. But almost none of these people have any real intimacy except Veroska, and even then, it's not till late in season 2 when we get any real insight on what they were like as a couple. With Stolas, they literally spent one day together as kids and didn't see each other for over 20 years, and once they did meet up again, Blitz only started having sex with him to further his business aims. This just keeps getting called back to, they spent one day together as kids, and sure, I guess they had a good time and all, that's what they show us at least, but it's treated as if like this huge anchor point to each of them in regards to like relationship, either as friends or partners or whatever it is you want to call it. But it's literally a day more than 2 decades beforehand. Sure, you could probably remember you met someone that you had a good time with, but you're not going to think of them as some great close friend unless either you have literally no other friends and no experience being happy around any other person, or you're just like obsessed with them. And when it comes to Moxie, he's just an employee Blitz stalks and happens to talk to occasionally, and Blitz is extremely explicit about how he doesn't respect Moxie. And during the sequence, we see also Fizz show up. And Fizz was just his adopted brother who he didn't talk to for quite a while and who he makes up with after like 2 conversations in a later episode. Then there's Stryker, who shows up in this dream sequence. And he just tried to convince Blitz to team up with him so Blitz would drop his guard. And when we actually finally get to Moxie's scene, it's just about how lame and weak Moxie is. That's literally the only thing that Moxie has as a character. He's a coward. He can't do anything on his own. Every time he tries at something, he fucks it up majorly. And it's just, why? Why is he here? Why is anyone like this guy? Did Millie just like him because he was fun to have sex with? Because they don't have any real chemistry together. They just kind of act out the scene. There's nothing about them that makes them play well together as characters. They're either constantly snogging, talking about sex, or just talking about whatever's happening in the moment. There's never any actual, like I said, chemistry. There's no chemistry between these people. They're just people who happen to be together in a scene for whatever reason. The episode ends with Luda coming to get them, and it's some big fight scene. They get out. That's about it. The entire episode was really just kind of a build up to whatever emotional scenes they wanted to do for like backstory and faux intimacy and familiarity between the two of them in their dream sequences. And it's fucking lame. Episode 7 is the closest we get to the actual proper overarching plot of the story where Moxie and Millie are going to this club owned and operated by Asmodeus, but for some reason the club is only for couples, which implies monogamy, which that seems like a very narrow vision of the concept of lust. Why that is, I don't know. Well, no, I do know why it is. It's just so they could arbitrarily keep Blitz out, so he would have to call Stolas for him to be able to get in there so he could stalk Moxie, Millie, and then advance the plot in some form. In this episode, it's only when others point out that Stolas and Blitz are seemingly in a relationship, or at least on a date together, that people act like it's a social faux pas. Nobody mentions it on the way in. The only other person to even notice that it's a thing is Stella, and even then it's just her being mad about getting cheated on. It's really only when people notice to tell the audience, because the audience can't figure it out from context clues, apparently. They really spell out why it's seen as a bad thing. Then there's this weird bit where Fizzarali introduces himself to people who most likely know who he is, because he's the guy who hangs out with Asmodeus at his club all the time. So why he needs to tell everyone who he is it's just an exposition dump for the audience to absorb all the information. And if you notice something, they just kind of tell people why something's important. They very much struggle to insinuate or let the audience figure it out for themselves. And one of the worst examples of this is a later episode in season 2, which we will get to. It starts off really good, and it's downright the best scene in the series so far, and then it immediately drops off the cliff because they fucking exposition dump all over your face. Then, when we get to the bit why Moxie is there to show off for Millie and sing for him, Moxie ends up singing a very heartfelt and slightly romantic song. But the weirdest part about this is, that itself is not the problem. The problem is, Moxie has lived in hell his entire life. He goes to a club that is owned by the sin of lust and is very clearly oriented towards lust. And it's in the lust ring, and he sings the heartfelt number to his wife, as if it would be considered normal for to do that, and wouldn't draw immediate mockery because Moxie's fucking dumb. Even Asmodeus immediately points out how weird he is for singing a heartfelt ballad in his, quote, lustful lounge. Why it is that most of the characters either don't know why things are happening in their society unless they need it to spell it out for the audience, but they also happen to know something so that they themselves can spell it out for the audience. I have no idea how they couldn't have figured out a better way to do something like this. I think it was just, one, they wanted to lead the musical number for this particular episode, and then they could also use this as a chance for Blitz to speak up and have attention drawn to him, which he does. Blitz just willingly draws attention to himself and gets embarrassed for some reason. He also acts surprised that Veronica is there after Fizz literally just announced it to everyone that she was there. And then while they're being mocked by Asmodeus is right to point out that Solus literally just gave up his life because he was horny and wanted it to, keep having sex with Blitz, but then he happened to catch feelings. Let's remember this. Everything that happens to Stolas is Stolas' fault. Stolas choose to entertain these feelings, to just try to make something out of something that is 100% going to cause drama, if not completely just destroy his life from the ground up. The song ends up getting finished. They're all embarrassed. They go home. And when Stolas gets dropped off and Blitz lays into him, everything Blitz says is right. Stolas has made their entire relationship about sex at every turn, and is only after supposedly a few months of it just using it as a way to have sex with each other does he all of a sudden want to be cute, cuddle, talk, or build some sort of relationship whatsoever. But at the same time, there's literally been scenes in previous episodes where everything that Stolas says about Blitz or wants to talk to Blitz about is always exclusively about sex. And it's only this episode where he really tries to make something more of it. Everything else is just hammered home to you right in your fucking face every step of the way. It's literally a relationship built on sex. And now Stolas is acting like, oh no, it's something else. We can actually try to do this. It's why? It didn't matter to you beforehand. This was just a way for you to get some release from your fucking wife who you hated. And once he's getting scolded from Blitz, Stolas ends up hanging on to hope and doesn't realize that it's all a waste of time until the next season. Now, episode 8, it's the final episode of this specific season. And it's a Luna episode. She's finally somewhat a character, but still quite minimalistic. She's just awkward, quick to anger, self-conscious, and doesn't do well with people in general. Not exactly the strongest characterization, but at least she's not just a teenager with a bad attitude anymore. We also learn in this scene that a second sin is dating a pedestrian, and it's not seen as some big deal, but it will be when it's confirmed that Asmodeus and Fizz are dating. That's a big deal, but for some reason, Beelzebub and Tex dating, that's not a big deal. But Stolas and Blitz dating, that's also a really big deal. The social pressures of higher ranking individuals in Hell having relationships with the lower masses is 100% dependent on whether or not they need it to push forward the story. Because, yeah, with Tex and Beelzebub, nothing ever comes from it. It's not seen as a big deal. Nobody even points it out as strange. It's a big deal when it's Fizz and Asmodeus, only in the episode where they openly acknowledge it, and we get a little hint that it might be brought back later by Mammon. And with Stolas and Blitz, it's part of the foundational reason why their story is happening at all. Most of the episode is just Luna being awkward at the party, and when she finally meets Beelzebub, Luna starts crying and wants to leave. Not sure why. She already knew Tex was dating someone, but I guess meeting her pushes her over the edge. But then she starts getting attention by the people at the party and wants to stay. Then Luna gets mad at B for being nice and trying to help her and Blitz. And overall, nothing really happens. It's just Luna getting mad at people or getting upset. The entire episode's weird. Like, nothing really of substance happens here other than basically establish, yep, Luna exists and Luna does things sometimes. The show does not really begin to progress until you get to Season 2. Season 2 is a lot more focused on the actual plot, making things finally come together and really pay off just about every little plot point that gets set up. Unfortunately, not all those plot points really needed to be paid off. Not all those plot points needed to even be there, because what comes from them is effectively nothing, or so minimalistic that if you literally had just never seen what the points were involved with, you would not be disadvantaged. Now, episode 1 is largely focused on backstory for both Blitz and Stolas. The whole episode is just around how they met when they were kids, and like the one day they had together where they kind of seemed to enjoy each other's company. We do get a slight look into the connection between Fizz and Blitz as kids. Basically, all it shows us, though, is that Fizz is better at making balloon animals, and for some reason this gets the adoration of the masses in general and makes him more popular. I'm not entirely certain why they need to add this. It's a very short segment of the episode, and more than anything, it's just a way to say, hey, audience, by the way, here's some extra detail. It might be important later. Make sure you're paying attention.
Is there a spot that is close to the front, but also far enough that I don't have to smell the pool?
After the whole interaction between Blitz and Stolas through their entire day spent together, we just cut back to normal time just before the main plot of the show takes place, where Blitz gets caught trying to break into Stolas' house, and Stolas recognizes him and then immediately assumes Blitz is there to have sex with him and not rob him.
Okay.
Which is, I don't know if it's played off as a joke, because it seems to be very serious when Stolas is talking about it, until Blitz starts playing along with it too, and then Stolas is just all of a sudden uncomfortable. One bit that really stood out to me, when Blitz is really leaning into the sexual aspect of it and acting as if he actually is there to seduce Stolas, there is this extremely strange dialogue dump that explains the entirety of Stolas' thought process when it comes to being with Blitz. It is the most awkward way to just spell out this entire thought process. It sounds weird. It completely shifts the tone of the scene in maybe 10 words total.
Oh, I've never had anyone want me this way. You have no idea how long I've craved this kind of passion, and how much it means that the one who wants me is my first ever friend. Oh!
And aside from that, the rest of the interactions between Stolas and Blitz in this episode, Stolas remembers the day with Blitz fondly, but even as an adult, for some reason, he doesn't look back and realize, oh, Blitz was robbing me. And he still thinks of Blitz positively for whatever reason, and just decides that everything is normal, and not only is it normal, that he should pursue an actual relationship with him. This part makes absolutely no sense. I have no idea how Stolas could justify this to himself, especially when him and Blitz really decide to hammer out the details of their arrangement, being Blitz comes by and has sex with him, and Stolas gives him access to the Grimoire so that he can use it to get to Earth.
Worst trade deal maybe ever.
This is, in fact, a recurring issue with Stolas. Stolas just lets things happen to himself. He allows himself to be manipulated by Blitz in like the most blatant ways possible, and just never seems to see any problem with it until almost the very end of this season. Granted, you could argue that this is in line with the characterization developed by the established history of Stolas, but he gets super attached to Blitz within like the shortest period of time, completely disregarding the whole, spending a day as children together, because, kids can make friends relatively fast. That's not the most unreasonable part. The most unreasonable part is when he sees him over 20 years later, and he's just immediately infatuated with him and completely destroys his life because Blitz is having sex with him. After we get all caught up with everything that happens leading up to Stolas deciding to actually go through with the divorce with Stella, we come back to right after he gets dropped off from Blitz, and Stolas is lamenting in his song about his loneliness, even hinting at the fact that he knows that he's not actually in a relationship with Blitz. It's just something that distracts him from his woes at home. And then Stella shows up. We get a couple little hints about characters and relationship between Androphis and Stolas and Stella. And the episode it ends there. The entire episode is focused solely on reestablishing / fleshing out the most important details in regards to Stolas. Episode 2 is an Octavia episode. It's a very clear-cut example of Octavia just not talking to her dad, and instead just being mad at him for dealing with behavior that's very common from her mother. At no point does she criticize her mother for her shitty behavior, distracting her dad, or how she treated him beforehand, which leads to the divorce. Most of the episode is dedicated to just finding Octavia once she manages to sneak into Blitz's work and steal back the book and go to the surface. Alongside Stolas and Octavia's relationship being built up, we get shown this bit throughout the episode of Blitz taking himself as Luna's father very seriously, at least to some extent, and the B plot of him getting abducted and being mistaken for a real-life celebrity, it ends up just being a way to force an emotional scene or him considering how he feels about Luna and how attached he is to her. And then the catch-up, but part of the episode has been spent with Luna being mad at Blitz and their relationship being kind of in a weird spot, so I guess it's not the worst thing in the world, but it also by no means should be taken as an example of good writing, because Luna's just shitty about anything Blitz says about her or to her, but until the very end where she's having this pseudo bonding scene with Octavia, and she makes this somewhat heartfelt, understanding, emotional statement about Blitz as a father, trying to relate it to how Stolas is as his father, for Octavia. In regards to Octavia's feelings towards her father, it's made very clear to her that, Stolas messed up to some extent, like he didn't remember the promise he made because he was busy doing other stuff, but at the same time, Octavia does not go out of her way to just say, hey dad, I don't know if you remember, but you promised to do this thing today, and we really don't have a whole lot of chances to do this, so can we just go out and do this? No, she just tries to vaguely insinuate that she wants to do something or talk to her dad about something, and when he's clearly frustrated and just trying to get things over with, she storms off and acts like somehow he's completely abandoning her when she's made the absolute minimal attempt to talk to him. And it's not till Octavia is reunited with Stolas right at the very end of the episode where she actually points out that, where Stolas remembers / finds out that this is what she wanted to talk to me about earlier, but still Octavia never says, yeah, I should have been more clear about that, or admits that she did anything wrong. She's just like, Oh, I'm sad. My dad hates me. He sucks. Worst father ever. I'm going to do literally nothing on my end. I find it very difficult to say anything positive about Octavia because, frankly, every problem that she faces is either caused by her or is made worse by her. Episode 3 is 20 minutes of Moxie being lame and gay, so you can just skip this one. Episode 4 starts off with Stolas agreeing to sit down and negotiate how much of his stuff that he has to give away to Stella, instead of just keeping all of his stuff and telling her to kick rocks. This is still weird for me. They're in hell. He's royalty. He's like the actual member of the Goetia family. She's not. She's just, that's the person that he got saddled with. And for some reason, he is still expected to make concessions to her. But why? What's to stop him from just saying, I'm not giving her shit. She's lucky I'm not having her killed and just moving on with my life. Stolas is basically being forced to give up anything and everything that he could realistically hold on to, if you think about it, just because they have to remind you that he's getting divorced, and somehow, despite being in hell, it works exactly the same way as it does up here, or at least in America. The way almost the entirety of the legal system and social norms is treated in hell in this show is very America-centric, or at least somehow parallels what you would expect here in America. Now, understanding that people write what they know, oh, that's fine, but at the same time, you're writing a show that takes place in an area that is very, very different to how the real world works, and that allows you to take a lot more creative licensing. But instead of that, you could really just describe hell in Vivziepop's shows as basically just hell-themed California. Anyway, back to the actual plot. After there's at least some progress made in regards to like what they're talking about and trying to establish all the rules for the divorce, Stryker shows up, and which sets up the main plot for the episode. The main B plot for this episode is Blitz is not going to save Stolas because he's taking Luna to get her a shot, and the entire subplot is primarily just to have a reason for Blitz to not show up and save Stolas, which can then, cause some friction later on in the show when it comes to their relationship, I guess. But while that's going on, we're mostly focusing on Stryker and Stolas. And the song for this episode, it's very bad. Like, it is not only annoying to listen to, it's annoying to the characters in the show. And what's worse is, it's not even like the most cringe part of this episode, because Stryker spends like the entirety of the episode being like the absolute worst parts of him, and there aren't any good parts of him. His entire characterization is cool, awesome, tough guy hitman who can do everything right, but also hates royalty and just says things that are vaguely race/class related. And instead of being like, say, a justifiably upset imp who doesn't like how him and the other imps are treated compared to the rest of the hierarchy of hell, he just comes off more as like this angry poor dude who doesn't like the fact that sometimes people have negative opinions of him and people like him when he's living in hell. The show constantly forgets where it's taking place, and it doesn't take into account or thought how living in hell might be significantly different culturally, socially, or legally from, say, the normal world. And when you notice it in the episodes, it brings the entire show to a halt in your mind. You're thinking, why are we doing this? Why is this happening? Why aren't we doing, say, this other thing? That would make more sense. The show does not incorporate its world building into a consistent or logical manner so that you can actually believe what's going on. When Moxie and Millie save Stolas, they bring him to the hospital, but they take him from Wrath, where he's being, attacked and held, and then they bring him to the Ring of Sloth. I don't know if for some reason Sloth is literally the only place where hospitals are, but it seems like an oversight and a weird detail, more designed to just force Blitz to see and interact with the consequences of not going to help Stolas, which could have also been avoided if Blitz had just gone to save Stolas with Moxie and Millie. And Stolas, despite being ignored when he was calling for help, still pines for Blitz and doesn't see this as a significant enough red flag to either give up on this relationship idea or at least try to bring the issue to the forefront so that he can talk to Blitz about it. And the episode just ends there. Episode 5 of Season 2 is far and away the worst episode. fucking nothing happens. It is just 20 minutes, once again, of Moxie being lame and gay, and then establishing another character from Blitz's past who hates him in this B-plot. And the B-plot itself does not really need to be there. It completely diverts the story from the clear main focus of it, just to say, oh man, look how tragic Blitz is. Don't you relate to him because he's such a shitty person and we're trying to force you to feel bad for him? Also, there's this one strange scene in this episode where Millie just decides that she is going to completely go off and berate Moxie for not worshiping her hard enough this one particular episode. When you watch it and you listen to what she has to say, and then you remember the things that actually happen in the show, the entire scene itself just doesn't make any sense. And it's very obviously just the forced emotional scene between these two characters in particular to act as if there's some sort of chemistry and a natural relationship going on between them. And it does not feel natural whatsoever. Now, episode 6 is the first Fizz-focused episode, and it starts by having the antagonist, Stryker and Moxie, just happen to be near where Blitz and Fizz are so that they could force the story to happen. For some reason, they couldn't even just make Stryker go out and find Fizz. The showrunners just decide, hey, instead of that, let's have them just happen to be near each other or on this one specific street on this ring at this exact moment in time. Then, when we cut to part of the B storyline that involving Solus talking to Asmodeus, Solus just admits openly to one of the Sins, who are, one of the 7 most powerful people in hell, that he openly, regularly breaks the law. Reminder that season 1, episode 3, the main cast only gets away with it by saying that they'll tell Satan if Veronica doesn't do what they want. So telling a sin only matters if the plot needs it to matter. This is a recurring issue. Things don't matter when they say they matter unless they need them to matter for the story, and it just ruins any sense of belief or continuity that can be formed within each of the episodes. Part of this episode also focuses on Asmodeus and Fizz having a relationship that they're trying to keep very secretive, but Asmodeus is super defensive of him and Fizz just even working together to the point where it is super obvious to anyone with just a little bit of understanding of context clues that clearly Asmodeus and Fizz are not just business partners as he claims, because they're constantly around each other, they're constantly showing affection, and they have to justify what they're doing to anyone who happens to walk in and be exposed to whatever it is they're doing at the time. And even later in the series, no, not even later in the series, in this episode, Moxie's dad points out that this is like the worst kept secret in hell.
Fizzy! Ugh. Oh, nigga, you gay!
So there is no way people haven't figured this out. And let's not forget that Beelzebub, who is also a sin, is openly in a relationship with some random pedestrian. Whether or not high-ranking demons or sins being in relationships with pedestrians is a social faux pas completely depends on whether or not they need to use it as a way to advance the plot or cause some sort of drama. This is not an oversight. This is not an occasional fuck up. This is an active failure of the writers. If you cannot keep the rules of your world consistent and you have to bend them, break them in regards to individual characters just because you can, or you don't want to have to deal with the consequences that would come from those bending and breaking of rules, you are not a good writer. This is a perfect example of an objective failure by the writing staff and the showrunners as a whole. When Moxie's dad ends up calling Asmodeus, trying to ransom Fizz back to him, Asmodeus does literally nothing to protest, obstruct, or get around the ultimatum given to him. All this despite being a sin and having quite a lot of authority, even if he is the lowest ranking one. He doesn't call up some mercenaries. He just agrees to have a sit down with Moxie's dad's lawyers and to give up literally everything he has to Moxie's dad just because. Why doesn't Asmodeus just say, call Mammon and tell him that someone has kidnapped Fizz and is hiding out in Greed? Mammon could easily just go get Fizz himself, or have his own version of some sort of merc squad. They make it very clear that Fizz is extremely valuable to Mammon in the very next episode, so there's no reason for Mammon not to do everything possible to keep him safe so he can keep marketing him. If Fizz dies or gets hurt, that is a direct hit to Mammon, his brand, and his income. And even if Asmodeus is the weakest sin and his relationship with Fizz is brought to the wider public's attention, so what? Asmodeus is, once again, he's a sin and can do whatever he likes. And even if he's boinking an imp, he's the sin of lust. So why would anyone care? It's not like he's some prude who doesn't do literally anything sexual whatsoever. Everything he does is related to sexual activity in some way or another. This entire problem is only a problem because the showrunners force it to be a problem, specifically for this episode, without either thinking it through or using information that most likely they had in regards to the next few episodes and keeping that in mind so that they could say, okay, hold on, if we're going to establish this in the next episode, we can actually establish it earlier in this, or at least hint at it somewhat here, and keep some level of realism or understandable cause and effect here. This is all not to mention the fact that Fizz goes from the ring of lust all the way to the ring of greed to buy milk, because I guess for some reason there are no stores in Lust, but there are stores in, say, places like Imp City up in Pride, and nowhere else. This is once again just a weird detail they added to force the story to happen in such a way that is almost vaguely believable. And once again, we are forced to just sit through Stryker being a grouchy poor person again. In the same scene where we also have to listen to Blitz just spout his copium about how he doesn't like Solus and won't commit to him because this horse isn't dead yet, and he just keeps going and going. Fizz even makes comments like, dude, I don't care. Why are you telling me? This isn't funny, guys. It's obviously being played as a joke, and it's not funny because there's no real punchline. It's just, yep, he's talking. He's still talking. And he's still talking. When they start to escape, there is this super heavy-handed, abrupt, emotional scene with random explosions of combat in between, like, minutes of dialogue, just so that they can remind the audience that, hey, yeah, they're still in danger. The entire exchange is just to lore dump as much as they can without having the entire episode literally just be focused on a extended flashback scene. They then talk loudly about their plan to escape, and the others just sit there and allow him to keep doing his very obvious distraction. They finally escape, they get back, and the episode ends after Fizz decides that he doesn't actually hate Blitz anymore because he had like a conversation for a couple minutes with him where Blitz finally says sorry, and they found out, oh, not everything was as it seemed after like the most minimal amount of work to figure out what happened. Okay, I guess. Episode 7 is another Fizz-focused episode. It's based around him having this obsession with being perfect, and this is an obsession he has that was never mentioned before or hinted at in any of the other times he's been talked about or shown up. He's also obsessed with pleasing Mammon for some reason. It doesn't make sense for him as a character since he's already well off dating Asmodeus. He's super famous. Without him, Mammon loses tons of money. And it's been that way for about 10 years now. There's no reason for Fizz to be this worried about anything. Fizz has more than just about anyone in hell. He's rich, he's in a happy relationship, and he's successful enough that there's not really a chance that he'll experience any hardship anytime soon. It feels like they want to do another episode about him where we see more of him and Mammon actually having interpersonal time, similar to the episode of Has Been a Hotel where Angel Dust and Valentina's relationship is really flushed out. But for whatever reason, they just couldn't figure out how they wanted to do it for Fizz and Mammon, so they made him worship his boss just to make the episode happen. And throughout this episode, Asmodeus makes tons of sense and makes very clear, concise points to Fizz, but Fizz doesn't seem to care because he's more concerned with what Mammon wants for some reason. And for a large part of this episode, Asmodeus is forced to be kept away from Fizz. They don't explain why he can't come with them. He just can't. And as the episode goes on, Fizz just becomes this delusional worrywart until like the very last section of the episode. Also, there's this weird exchange where Fizz is being really nice to this deaf kid in hell. Why are there deaf kids in hell?
What do you mean by that?
What did Vivziepop mean by this? The episode really focuses just on this contest to become the next marketable clown. It includes a singing contest, which I don't know how that relates to being a clown. It's very out of place, and it doesn't make sense any way that I can figure out. So we end up getting to the point where Fizz is having like his third breakdown this episode, and Asmodeus can just all of a sudden suddenly come in. He couldn't see him once Fizz got to the contest, but now he can. Once again, they literally never tell you anything even remotely close to why he can't be there. And the talk between him and Asmodeus just devolves into this prolonged words of affirmation word salad where we're being told why Asmodeus likes Fizz, we're being told what his character is, we're never shown it, and when you think about it, just about everything Asmodeus says about Fizz is not true. It's just to make him feel better. And it doesn't even make like somewhat vague sense for what we see. It's just a bunch of blank slate compliments designed to hand wave this crippling insecurity. Then Fizz quits. He gets yelled at by Mammon, and Asmodeus steps up to defend him.
Beta!
And then they confirm to the masses that Asmodeus and Fizz are dating, and they hint at this possible consequence for future episodes, but I have a feeling nothing is going to happen, especially since Asmodeus is one of the 7 most powerful people in Hell. He controls an entire ring, and I just don't see how he can be taken down without risking every other sin's power and position. Because let's not forget that Beelzebub is also dating just some random civilian, and she's not trying to hide it even in the slightest. And it's not a problem when she does it. So I don't believe that they can make it an actual problem for Asmodeus without, once again, just destroying the rules established in their world building. Episode 8. Aside from the beginning song and the final confrontation of this episode, you can really just skip it because there's nothing of substance in it. It's just the humans and the Chibs fighting most of the cast while we wait for Stolas and Blitz to have their own actual important bit. When it does start, Stolas tries to have a serious moment to manage expectations between him and Blitz. He goes out of the way to make his view very clear to Blitz, and Blitz doesn't take it seriously and acts like this is the first time he's tried to be serious with him at all. Now, granted, it was this point in the last season when he last tried to make this very clear to Blitz, but it's not like he hasn't tried at all since then. He was pretty clear a few times about what he wanted, but Blitz is just purposely dense about it. Now, granted, we're finally getting a payoff to the whole acid trip scene where we learn that he's afraid of intimacy, but he's been getting along better with people throughout multiple episodes at this point, and we will in later episodes of this season see that as well. So this idea that he's still afraid doesn't really work when every time he's alone with someone, he either makes up with them or at least decides to respect them more and be pleasant around them. And then he just decides to explode at Stolas after this, as if Stolas hasn't been showering him with adoration and affection throughout the entire time they've spent together. It comes out of nowhere. He doesn't even mention a specific instance. He just says things to be hurtful. This isn't a fear of intimacy. This is just Blitz being stupid. Since their literal first encounter after their one day together, Stolas has been trying to make a relationship with Blitz happen, but Blitz just ignores it or pushes back constantly. I want to say more positive things about the show because it's not all bad. This scene is actually really well acted. The voice actors did a fantastic job, and we get a lot of nice, good cinematography that really looks good. It gives like these nice framed instances as the scene goes on. It looks pretty, and it's very obvious that they worked hard on it. The lighting's not terrible. Everything looks actually pretty good. It's just what happens in the episodes and in these specific scenes that fucking sucks. Episode 9 of Season 2 has a really good start to it. It's actually really good. Ignoring all the problems leading up to this point, when it comes to the whole relationship between Blitz and Stolas, the way that it is handled here, directly after the end of the previous episode, it is fantastic. For just about all of it. The only problems I would have with it initially are Stolas starts off like he told off Blitz for being clingy or annoying, and not like Blitz outright rejected him, which you could kind of change to this because it's Stolas reacting. Blitz, I'm not going to play this game where I pretend like nothing has happened. As this first scene goes on, Stolas is more annoyed than anything, and Blitz still doesn't seem to understand why Stolas dumped him, so at least Blitz is acting in character, but Stolas is mad at Blitz now, which isn't normally how he will respond to this. Stolas likes Blitz and doesn't have a negative thing to say about him or anyone else unless he actually hates them. So this seems more like a way to emotionally punish Blitz in an out-of-character way rather than just tossing him out. If he really didn't want to see Blitz or didn't want to talk to him, he could have done the same thing he did last episode, where he just portals him away. However, this scene, it fluctuates. It fluctuates a lot. There's little bits here and there that I have problems with, but this first opening scene does eventually get to the part where it feels really good and natural. The dialogue after Solus calls out Blitz is really good. It's honestly the best part of this episode, and probably the best part of this show so far. It integrates not only their past together, but pays off Blitz listening to Stryker and fighting him off for the first time. The conversation doesn't actually suck till right at the end, where Blitz starts by mocking the idea of apologizing to him, and then Blitz just immediately barfs out his entire internal struggle.
Oh, you think I can't apologize? For what? You want me to be like, oh, sorry, this entire time I assumed the worst because I was convinced the prince could never love someone like me, and I've let my self-hatred stop me from apologizing to anyone I could never care about.
All over the scene. Takes the scene from like an 8.5 to a fucking 4. And even then, it's not really an apology. Blitz ends up making it mostly just about himself instead of apologizing, which does reinforce the whole idea of the episode that the awful feeling Blitz has is directly related to him and his actions. And the episode is just about how Blitz moves on in his life from the previous episode, which is better than a lot of newer shows would do. A lot of shows today would have resorted to having Stolas be guilted into taking Blitz back because sometimes Blitz is also sad and the shitty behavior he has shouldn't be held against him because of that, which is a nice diversion from what seems to be a norm in a lot of writing these days. We once again see a problem where it flashes the scene of the one day they spent together as children as if it's some deep-seated bond they have and didn't spend more than 20 years apart and then build a transactional relationship and happen to catch feelings for each other. The show acts as if these two are the same people as they were the day they met 20 years ago. But 20 years is quite a long time, and people change. Solus even says he barely remembers Blitz's name, and we're supposed to believe that this is true love or something when it actually just two lonely people who start a relationship based on sex. Then one of them tried to make it something serious out of desperation, and the other wasn't ready. And when they didn't commit because they weren't mature enough to take it seriously, they were dumped, and now they regret it because they're more scared of getting close to someone than they are of being alone again. It's unfortunate that the show wants us to root for these two when their relationship is extremely toxic, and most likely in reality would be doomed to fail because these two are at best trauma bonding over their loneliness and at worst jumping into something just for the sake of being in a relationship. At the very end of the fight, Stolas asks him if he's ever apologized to anyone, and then Blitz spends the rest of the episode going around and not really apologizing to anyone but going through the motions because, I mean, it's in character for him. So he doesn't actually want to apologize to just about anyone until he gets to the very end where he kind of apologizes to Vraska and clearly wants to with Stolas, but nothing seriously gets like undone or anything. He still has to live with the consequences of being dumped and comes to grips with all the people who hate him so much that they throw this party every year just because, well, they want to bond with other people who had their lives either ruined or at least disrupted in some way by Blitz's actions. Within the remaining episodes of this season, Stolas is going to throw away everything he has for Blitz because he just doesn't want to be alone and thinks that Blitz, who's 20-something, maybe 30 at this point, and has been doing what he's been doing for 30 years, Stolas thinks that he's just going to stop almost overnight, and effectively in the show timeline, he does kind of, quote, change overnight. But in actuality, he's basically just the same person, and he's just going to be a little less rude to people who are trying to be nice to him. Episode 10. The show waits till this exact episode to focus on Millie in particular, and it just ends up making her, once again, being the only somewhat serious person in the general cast. Most of the episode is just her humoring Blitz before making him take things seriously when the eventual emotional scene shows up. This episode wants to be both comedic, no matter how much it struggles with that, and serious at the same time, while trying to continue the plotline of the last episode, and that's generally the show's problem. Like I've said before, it can't figure out what it wants to do or what kind of show it wants to be. The first season had more of a comedic leaning to most of its episodes, while season 2 is much more heavily focused on the relationship between Blitz and Solis, to the point where it shifted from episodic adventures that the show in some part wanted to do in the beginning to being a more drama-oriented show. But the problem with it is that the balance between these two often fluctuates wildly, not even between episodes, but between like individual scenes. It's this chaotic mess that can work together if handled well, but here it isn't, because like in season 2 episode 8, where the vast majority of the episode is trying to be comedic, and then everything just comes to a crashing halt to be this serious emotional scene. And since most of the comedy in this show is either sex-related or sway, there's just no saving grace for its comedy and its bizarre fixation with being comedic and serious literally in between sentences. In this specific episode, the emotional scene ends up just being another one where Blitz is reminded about how his life sucks because he's a shitty person and happens to have some sort of trauma following him around in whatever he does. Then directly afterwards, it goes into having this forced bonding moment between Millie and him, since they haven't had any real development from Millie up till now. Even in regards to her background, Millie just says that she should respect Blitz more because he respects her, ignoring the constant stalking, throwing away her pension money for the plates established at the beginning of this episode, and actively disrespecting her in front of basically everyone, and completely ignoring whatever she has to say up until now. They just say things just to force you to believe or create some sort of characterization of someone just because they need to do it, because the show cannot establish a good, consistent characterization for most of its characters. And I think the reason before that is, one, they keep putting in things that don't matter to the story, and the length of the episodes isn't really totally consistent. The episodes are extremely short. Like, the shortest episode is the first proper episode. It's like 13 minutes long. And then you get to season 2, and episode 7 is over 30 minutes long. And the rest of the episodes for this season are either just under 20 minutes or over 20 minutes. A lot of the episodes that tend to be shorter rush whatever's happening and ignore the whole idea of character establishment. But they also want to have these really long, dramatic episodes where they can have these big emotional confrontations. They try to make them these big things where shit tons of character development and growth happen in these individual scenes, while they leave the rest of the episodes somewhat bare and rushed through. It is 100% a problem of pacing. They don't know how to spread out what they want to do throughout the episodes. They either make it too short because they just need something to fill time and they add like minimal details that most of the time don't matter, or they focus the entire episode on building up to or playing out whatever large emotional scene they want to focus on. And this is one of them. Millie doesn't really have a character up to this point. She's just strong, she fights, and sometimes she gets a little wound up or angry about certain things. Other than that, there's nothing really to say about her. So here they just decide, oh, that's right, we have to make sure the audience knows that Millie thinks about things and has like problems with how people act and stuff like that. But they don't want it to have any lasting consequences because the show is very much about Blitz and how Blitz ends up getting liked by everyone. But don't forget, Blitz is super tragic. Episode 11. Finally, after like 20 episodes of illegality of using the book, it finally has some consequences. After Stella tells Androlphus that Stolas is letting Blitz and his company do illegal things, and when he gets upset, for some reason, he calls his sister hot, which, okay, I guess. Then Hell's equivalent of cops then show up and try to arrest the main cast. Moxie stops being a cuck for like one entire sentence.
I fucking hate you so much, Blitz.
And then we go to the trial, where we get to meet Satan, the Sin of Wrath. He's effectively the overlord while Lucifer is gone. And for some reason for him, Satan, the biggest, baddest, strongest, most evil guy in all of hell, second only to Lucifer, he has an assistant who's helping him manage his anger. I imagine it was something like, oh, haha, it's so funny because the contrast, but it doesn't work here. It's just like this cringe thing that keeps showing up as the whole trial goes on. They make the entire trial a sham, which is very in line with what you expect to be like in hell, especially with the vast social gaps between like the sins, the royalty, and the imps and shit. The world building has generally been secondary to the plot up to this point, and as I keep outlining, it's not particularly good or consistent here. And it seems strange for the court to care what nobles think equally as the sins when they're taking a vote to decide what they want to do. And even if they do, why would it matter? Satan seems to be in total control of the court and what happens within it. So why bother even asking? They keep trying to establish that he rules with an iron fist here. They've made passing mentions of him about what would happen if you upset him. It would really make sense that he's the only person whose opinion would matter more than anyone else in this scenario except Lucifer. But since Lucifer's not here, whatever Satan wants to do should take precedent unless the others want to fight over it. Also, this episode introduces this weird Spanish bird guy who only seems to be here to oppose Androphis and be Spanish. He's never been around before this. And even then when he's opposing Androphis, kind of not. He's just filling time more than anything. And after the 3 or 4 times he chirps up, he just disappears from the episode. It is a very strange addition. And when Stolas finally shows up and decides that he's going to sacrifice himself to protect Blitz, the court just starts letting him sing when they were very keen on getting the entire trial over with. And it made a pretty big show of Satan being in charge and even being in total control of hell. I mean, there even before Lucifer, but he just lets Stolas get away with singing. Even after everything's said and done, he just takes Stolas' power and lets him get away with it and takes his status as well. But why? It undermines the stakes we are led to believe are going to fall him. Other than being less influential, Stolas doesn't really suffer for any real consequence for this. It just seems that he doesn't have to hide or be ashamed to be with Blitz anymore. And it's okay now to openly insult him or be rude to him in public. And even then, that's not really a consequence, is it? And for all the showing they do with this and all the occasional references to him, Satan comes out of this not seeing the big shot who rules with an iron fist. He's just a guy who picks favorites. He's not ruling with fear. He's just an elitist. It's no wonder why he's not in charge when Lucifer is around. Other than being intimidating to the rest of hell, he can't really seem to commit to whatever role or position he thinks he's in. He's mentioned quite a few times throughout the show and is treated as someone to be feared and respected by all. But with just the right circumstances, he'll let you get off with a blatant violation of law, even going so far as to make some big show of it, but actually nothing's going to happen to you. What's to stop basically everyone in hell who has some form of position from opposing Satan and doing something openly illegal like Stolas did? That combined with the fact that the sin of wrath is trying to manage his anger. I'm not entirely certain what they want Satan to be here. They want him to simultaneously be this imposing, super important figure, second only to Lucifer, who you dare not make angry or cross in any way, shape, or form, because if you do, he might just let you get away with it. Stolas should have died in this scene, or at minimum gone into some form of exile. Otherwise, literally everyone just gets away with it. This whole totalitarian rule or show trial bullshit amounts to nothing other than just saying now Stolas and Blitz are together and they don't have to hide it, they don't have to be ashamed, and now we can kind of do this whole subplot of Stolas being disconnected from Octavia now. Yay. One other thing that happens in this episode is Stella decides that she's going to block Octavia from even going to the trial, and Octavia, just the second she sees her mother, gives up on the idea of trying to go see her dad or find out what's going on, and then decides in the next episode that she's going to hold it against Stolas, ignoring the parts where Stella boasts about not letting Stolas talk to her, even going so far as to literally take the phone away from her when Stolas is trying to call, and then Octavia acts like her father doesn't love her or something. After Stolas basically gets off scot-free and gets to be with Blitz now with no repercussions for any of his actions, he ends up moving in with Blitz, and the episode ends with them being, sad about it. Episode 12, like I said, Stella boasts about not letting Octavia see Stolas. Stolas gets to spend the first days after giving up on his life being spat on, scorned, all while looking for his pills, trying to deal with his depression. It's weird that they make this a recurring thing of his, where he's depressed and has these pills, because if you read the label, they're literally just hard candy. I don't know why this detail is being added, because it's treated by Octavia when she finds the pills in the house like some huge revelation, like, oh man, and he was depressed and he needed this to just be around me and the rest of the family. It's literally candy. A large part of the episode is just dedicated to him having his little sad moment. The only thing that really seems to make his life terrible at this point is the fact that he's poor and has to like do things now other than sit around being rich and doing whatever the fuck it is he's been doing in between his like once a month work with the grimoire and seeing Blitz. And for quite a bit of it, he just kind of forgets about Octavia. Octavia decides that she's going to do like this sad song about how like, oh, my father betrayed me, and it's a callback to the song he sang for his, and she blames him for being gone despite him trying to call her nonstop and her mother explicitly bragging about trying to ruin his life and keep them apart. And everyone in hell seems to know what happened at the court, but not once does Octavia investigate to learn anything for herself or even just think about what's happening around her and do some deductive reasoning. Even during her song about how terrible he is and how much she hates him now, his shadow reaches out to help her and she smacks it away as if it's some sort of like mocking gesture designed to insult her. I can't figure out for the life of me how they think that Octavia's reasoning here is sound, other than just saying that they are actively trying to make Octavia as dumb as fucking possible. And after he's been sad for a couple days and he can't talk to Octavia, he can't take his candy pill, he has the best reality check moment ever, but he can't fucking do anything about it. And then he just storms off. During the secondary plot with Blitz and the rest of the cast, Blitz decides he's just going to give up halfway through the mission because it's two gay guys and two daughters that are together as a faux family. He sees the family as the family he could have with Stolas. This is the first time that Blitz has thought of the connection between him and Stolas as a way to like build a family and not just be some form of dating. He goes from in between episodes from saying like, maybe I should like be in a relationship with him, maybe I should take this seriously and try to make the best of it because it's clear that this person cares about me even with all my flaws or whatnot. So maybe it's not a terrible idea to then immediately, oh man, I can't wait to start a family and raise our children together. Seems like a pretty big leap there, and the whole fear of intimacy thing you think would keep him from advancing his relationship with Stolas, even just like a little bit if he's just trying to get used to the idea of being in a serious relationship. But nope, it's just gonna jump right to the whole raising children together bit. It is just an enormous leap, and it doesn't make sense for him as a character. Stolas decides to nut up and go see Octavia just because it's like, well, it's not like people were actually stopping him from doing it. And he like, starts beating up on Androphis. And then he starts to lose, and then the others show up, they start fighting. And then at the very last second, Octavia shows up to save Stolas, and then disowns her dad, refusing to let him speak and explain literally anything. She just shouts him down, and Stolas just sputters through the entire conversation, never saying that he was banished. Stolas has like these minimal scenes or like bursts of assertiveness, and this would have been a perfect time for him to just like nut up and say, Octavia, I am your father, and you are going to listen to what I have to say. No, he just lets her keep walking away. He just rolls over and lets it all fucking happen. The episode ends with Stolas is miserable, his life is ruined, Millie's pregnant all of a sudden, Blitz and Stolas bond on the fire exit, and they couldn't even have the bonding moment without ending up talking about sex again. And that's where the show ends as of time of recording. I really wish that this had been better written and it would have at least had like a 6 or 7 out of 10 an overall story, but so much of this show is just like last minute cramming into the episode of whatever they want to do, or just poorly paced mixture of either drama or what they think passes for comedy. Probably like the third time I've said it in this video, but I think it bears repeating. The biggest problem with this show is it doesn't know what it wants to do or how to do it. I'd rather not end this on a completely negative note. There are some things that I do like about the show. Like, if you go through, just about every episode has at least a couple of good scenes that are extremely well done art-wise. It's not something that you'll see in, say, G1 Transformers, where you could find animation errors just about every single episode. There are animation errors, to be certain, but it's not terrible overall. Now, knowing what I know about the fans of this sort of show, if they do end up finding this video, I'm not saying you can't like it. You can like whatever you want, but to say that it's a good show is, well, false.
Oh man, this guy's so handsome and cool. I want to subscribe.
You know, for a show that's focused about the goings on in hell, there's quite a lot of parts that seem to be focused on people's individual sexualities. Wait a minute, hold on. Alright. Okay. Wait a minute. This is just the main cast. And out of the main cast, only 1 in 5 of them is straight. What did Vivzie mean by this?